Jake and Patty Berg, along with their 3 children, Kayla age 12, Weston age 8, and Pearl age 6, were leaving Pennsylvania on April 30th, 2006 on their way to Oklahoma when they were involved in a life-threatening car accident. They were immediately rushed to in Washington City. Both parents sustained serious injuries and were in a coma for over a week. Shortly after being stabilized, the doctors and nurses were forced to call the police after noticing some strange and disturbing markings on all of the family members. Once they awoke and were coherent, the police had a lot of questions that needed to be answered. This is a conversation between Jake Berg and Officer Adam Gardner. Officer Adam Gardner: glad to see you awake, Mr. Berg. We need to discuss some things with you. When your family was brought into the doctors and nurses noticed all of you have the same exact markings and scars covering your entire bodies. Care to explain? If I don't like your answer, we'll be forced to call child services. Also, just so you know, the doctors and nurses talked to your children and heard their side of the story, so what you have to tell us should be very interesting, to say the welcome to Dark Rod Legends ... where fear takes form and shadows tell their stories. Let's begin. Least Jake Berg: thank God it's out in the open. We've kept this a secret for so many years. I don't think I can do it anymore. We tried running once, but nothing changed. They're always there, always taking. It all started after Kayla, our first little redhead, came into this world. We were living in my parents' old home in Berg, which is where I grew up from the age of 3. After they both suddenly passed one night, Kayla was only a month old when it first started. I was in bed asleep one night when some strange noises coming from her room woke me. I sat up, looked over at the sweet, dark-haired beauty lying next to me and thought about waking her up, but knew how tired she was. I also didn't have to work the following day, so I decided I'd go check on her. As I was walking down the hallway towards her room, I heard the strange noises again, making me pause and listen. It was weird. It didn't sound like any noise a baby would make. It sounded almost like talking. What the hell could that be? I thought my ears were deceiving me as I then heard the sound of tiny but heavy feet running across the hardwood floor. Without hesitation, I took off running the rest of the way to her room, flipping on the light as I entered, expecting to see a rat or some kind of animal. I briefly paused, giving her room a once over, but there was nothing. I rushed over to her crib and could see she was wide awake, staring at me, about to cry, so I picked her up and started cuddling her. My thoughts went back to what I'd heard and hoped I was just hearing things, since the house was old. Once she fell asleep, I put her back down and went back to bed. I didn't sleep much that night, though, as every sound would make me jump. When morning finally came and I could hear Patty stirring, I asked, did you hear anything last night? I heard the strangest noises coming from Kayla's room, so I got up, and as I was walking down the hallway, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like talking, then the sound of tiny but heavy feet running across the floor. You heard what? Probably just a mouse, a rat. We should get some traps, she replied as she chuckled. I didn't hear a thing though, honey. I thought I might have heard you get up to go check on Kayla, but wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not. I'm actually surprised she didn't wake up to feed, she said. Weird. I definitely heard something, I responded. All I could think about that day was what I'd heard and having an overwhelming desire to protect Kayla at all costs before she came into the world. I never felt the need to protect someone like that. That all changed the moment I laid eyes on her. Everything was fine for a few days. Then one night around 11, I just finished watching an old episode of the Annie Griffith Show after a long day at work. While Patty and Kayla slept, I went and grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat back down on the couch. I distinctly remember the heater was running, but once it reached the set temperature, it stopped, making it dead quiet in the house. I was about to take another swig when I again heard the tiny heavy footsteps. I immediately set my beer down on the coffee table, jumped up and sprinted towards her room. Her door was always open at night. As I ran to the side of her crib, I the first looked down and could see she was very distressed as tears welled up in her eyes and she started crying. "It's okay, sweetie, I got you," I said as I picked her up. I flipped on the light and started frantically looking around the room for whatever made the noise. If it was some sort of animal, the last thing I wanted was it biting Kayla. "I need to get those damn traps," I whispered aloud to myself. "Honey, what's going on?" said Patty as she entered the room. "I'm not sure, I heard something running again," I replied. "Are you being serious?" "I told you to get the traps," she said in an agitated tone. "Yes, I know, and I will, but now I'm sure I heard it," I replied. "I think she needs to be changed, and she's probably hungry," she said as she walked over, taking Kayla for me. "Yeah, maybe," I said as I walked back to finish my beer. No sooner had I sat down and took a swig, I blurted out, "Jake, come quick." I jumped up like I was on fire and ran to the room. "What is it?" I asked in a panic. Patty said nothing as she glared down at Kayla's thigh. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was seeing things as I knelt down to get a closer look. I then realized I wasn't seeing things. There on Kayla's thigh was a strange red and brown marking in the shape of what looked like a bull's horn, about an inch long. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It can't be a birthmark because we would have for sure noticed by now, and it's way too perfect and detailed. It's almost like a tattoo, but it's not. I thought, "What in Lord's name is that?" I asked. "I have no idea. It certainly wasn't there before," Pi said as she tried gently rubbing it off with the baby wipe, "but it wouldn't." She looked at me sternly and was about to say something when I cut her off. "Hey, I had nothing to do with it. How the hell would I do that anyway? It looks almost like a tattoo. Should we call the police?" she asked, "and tell them what they'll think we did it, or we're crazy? Either way, we'll be screwed," I replied. We were silent as we pondered what to do. It then hit me as I thought to myself, what if the thing I'd heard running had something to do with it? I kept that to myself for the time being, knowing Patty would think I'm nuts if I pushed it. What was happening was hard for me to comprehend back then. Anyway, as I sat there watching Pi change and feed her, I could tell she was deep in thought as well. Maybe she was starting to think what I'd been hearing wasn't so crazy after all. Either way, neither of us knew what to think or what could possibly be going on. We had no idea the underscore that lay ahead of us. The next day I bought a bunch of traps, putting them in Kayla's room in the entire house, but never caught anything. A month went by though where nothing happened. We would have forgotten had the marking on Kayla's thigh not been there as a constant reminder. One Sunday around noon, we were in the kitchen making lunch as Kayla was taking a nap when we heard the strange noises, the talking I'd heard before coming from her room. Pi was standing across from me as she let go of the knife she was holding, hitting the counter with a loud thud. I was about to say, "Did you hear that?" when we again heard it. We dropped everything and ran to her room. What we saw as we entered her room was something neither of us could have imagined existed inside of Kayla's crib. With her were two strong-looking red and brown creatures, both about a foot high, with arms and legs. I stood there dumbfounded for a few seconds before quickly coming to my senses and making a beeline over to her. I raised my arm as I was going to swat the creatures away, but they were way too fast as they bolted out of the crib. Going underneath it, I knelt down and lifted the crib skirt, fully expecting to see them, but to my surprise there was nothing but diapers and wipes. I looked up at Patty, who was speechless with a look of dread on her face. "Patty, check on Kayla," I shouted as I continued looking around the room for the creatures. Seconds later she hysterically screamed out, "Oh my God, Jake, what's going on? What happened to her?" I immediately stopped and turned to look back at her. She was looking down at something as I watched a drop of blood from Kayla's arm hit the carpet. It was then I could see there on Kayla's arm almost down to her wrist was a small hole. There was a slow but steady stream of blood coming out of it. I then noticed blood dripping from her foot. As I watched our beige carpet turn red, I could see another small hole near the outside of her ankle. Just what in the hell is going on? What were those things? How can that even be possible? I said with anger I'd never experienced before. I don't know, our little baby Patsy replied as she started bawling. My first knee-jerk reaction was to call the police, but again the thought we'll get blamed for sure quickly squashed that idea. I know you're going to say call the police, but then what? You know without a doubt we'll get blamed, and if we even mention the creatures we saw, they'll take her from us and throw us in a mental hospital. She didn't reply, just continued bawling. She knew I was right. We had no choice but to say nothing and keep it a secret. The weird thing though, Kayla was completely calm the entire time. It was almost like she was sedated. I put my arm around Patty's shoulder saying let's go sit down on the couch. As we left the room I went and grabbed some clean rags so I could apply pressure to Kayla's wounds to stop the bleeding. When Patty finally calmed down I said we need to go to the store and get some antibiotic ointment and bandages for her. I don't want to leave you here alone, so you're both coming with me, I said. She simply nodded her head. I then got up from the couch and prepared everything as she sat there cuddling Kayla. Neither of us uttered a word as we drove to the store. There was no way we could fathom what had just taken place. This stuff only happens in movies, not in real life. Shortly after getting the necessary supplies, I bandaged up Kayla's arm and leg while she sat in her car seat. When I got back in the driver's seat, Pi was staring out the window. We have two options right now. We can stay at the hotel for the night, decide what to do, or we can stay with my older brother and his family in Harrisburg. The problem with staying with my brother is we'll need a valid reason for staying there, and how long can we actually stay there? Money is tight right now, so staying at a hotel long term isn't much of an option either. Maybe a week at most, I said. She was quiet as she continued staring out the window. It wasn't until I grabbed her shoulder and said Pi. She looked back at me with fear in her eyes. Hotel or my brother's house? I asked. Again hotel, she replied softly. Okay, we need to go back to the house first to get some things, namely Kayla's baby stuff, I said as I fired up the car and started driving back home. When I pulled into the driveway, I have to admit I was terrified to go back inside. I waited until I stepped out of the car and closed the door before taking a deep breath so Patty wouldn't know how scared I really was. I can do this, I said to myself as I stepped up to the door, turned the handle and walked inside. Something felt different now, maybe because of what had happened. I don't know. I used to feel safe and comfortable there because it was the house I grew up in and it reminded me of my parents now, though I only felt uneasiness and distrust. The first room I went to was Kayla's, as her things were most important. I remember switching on the light and gasping as they're written on the wall in blood were the words, "No. Run." My knees started buckling as I stood there dazed. What's going on? Can't be real. How could it be? This sort of thing doesn't happen, I thought. When I finally snapped out of it, I went about gathering our things. As I was putting our things by the front door, I thought about whether or not to tell Pi about the wall or just clean it off and keep it a secret. I ultimately decided to clean it off and keep it to myself. I didn't want her stressing anymore, or worse, having a mental breakdown. When I got outside, I put her stuff in the trunk and climbed in the driver's seat. What took you so long? Asked Pi as I sat down. I hurried as fast as I could, I replied, knowing full well it was because I took time to carefully clean the blood off the wall and dispose of the evidence. We did feel a sense of relief the first night at the hotel as we mulled over how could what we saw be real and what our next move should be. The last thing we wanted was to go back to the house. All that changed around 2 a.m. On the second night, we gone to bed around midnight with me falling into a deep sleep rather quickly. I was having a weird dream when I felt something on my foot. I rolled over thinking it was just Pi when suddenly something ran up my leg. I yelled out as I threw the covers off, jumped out of bed and switched on the lamp that was next to my bed. What the? I said as I wasn't sure if I was seeing things or still dreaming. Where my foot had been was now soaked in blood. I looked down at my right foot and it was covered in blood. "What's going on, Jake?" Patty asked as she woke up. I lifted my leg, grabbed a hold of my foot and could see a small hole similar to Kayla's in the exact same spot. I put my foot down, moved my boxers to the side and couldn't believe it. There on my toe was the same red and brown bull's horn, and the same spot as Kayla. Patty's mouth was wide open as she couldn't believe it either. Her attention then turned to something as she screamed out, pointing to the wall above the TVO. ___, I said aloud as I saw the words in blood again. "No, run." "What does it mean, Jake?" she asked. Frantically, I took a deep breath, letting out a sigh as I replied, "I have something to tell you. I also saw this back in Kayla's bedroom when I went to gather our things. Now don't get mad I didn't tell you, because you were already on the verge of losing it." Kayla, who was on Patty's side of the bed, began crying, so she picked her up and began feeding her as I went and sat down on one of the chairs, trying to wrap my brain around everything. I stared at the words on the wall for the longest time and came to the disturbing conclusion, maybe we truly can't outrun whatever these things are. A while later, I bandaged up my foot and went back to sleep around 4 a.m, if you could call it sleep. That day we spent hours debating what to do, even if we wanted to try running from these things. We financially couldn't at the time, and if we did, would it even work? We didn't want to move in with my brother or any of her family members for fear we'd bring them with us, so we made the difficult decision to stay in the house. Years went by as life does, except for the GGA as they're called. They visit us every few days in the middle of the night, take from one of us the blood they need, then disappear. They make a small hole in the exact spot as the person they took blood from before, then seal the hole up when they're done. Why, I imagine so they can continue feeding on us. Why the mark of the horn on all of our thighs, I do not know. Every year we get a new and different marking somewhere on our bodies, as I'm sure you've already seen on us. They've never gone above our necks or on our hands though, which I guessed was for obvious reasons. As you can see, the rest of our bodies are covered in small circular scars. The saddest part is our children think it's a normal part of life, even though we've adamantly told them never to tell anyone, or mommy and daddy will get taken away from them. Parole asked me one day, why are they always bleeding me? That was heartbreaking, as I didn't have an answer. Everything changed one day last summer. I was down in the basement fixing part of the sheetrock when I noticed an envelope stuffed behind it. As I took it out, I noticed written on the front was the word GGA. "What the hell is this?" I said aloud to myself. I opened it up and there was a letter dated August 5th, 1969. "Do not bring a newborn into this house" was written at the top. The letter then went on to say they must start with a newborn, and once they do, it will never end. They will follow you to the ends of the earth until one day it's over and we bleed you dry. They're called the GGA. They need human blood to survive. That's all that was written, but it was enough. A few days later, while Patty and I were out to dinner, I showed her the letter. I wanted to be out of the house in case they listened to us. We made the decision to try and run the following spring, even though we knew it might be futile. We picked Oklahoma as we'd hoped it was far enough away, but also because Patty's mom was born in Shy. I told her I'd let her know the very day we were going to leave, just in case. The day I felt it was a good time to run, I came up to her and whispered in her ear, "It's time." She looked me in the eyes, nodded her head, quickly packed a few things, and we ran. We were on the freeway on our way out of Pennsylvania when I remember a car coming across the median at his head-on. I then woke up. Here, after Jake finished telling his story, Officer Gardner went and talked to his superiors. A decision was made to call Jake's brother in Harrisburg to come get the kids, while Jake and Patty would be held for a psychological evaluation that night. Jake and Pi, as well as the kids, were all in separate rooms. Sometime during the night, Jake's heart rate monitor flatlined, causing the doctors and nurses to rush to his room. The nurse who was first on the scene swears she saw something quickly go under Jake's bed and vanish. They tried reviving him, but it was too late. He was dead. Upon further investigation by the coroner, it was revealed Jake's body had been completely drained of blood. 5 minutes later, Pi flatlined. Her body was drained of blood as well. 20 minutes after Pi died, the doctor in charge told one of the nurses to go check on the children and bring them to his office so he could break the devastating news to them. A few minutes later, she came running to the doctor's office acting hysterical, saying they're gone, there's only blood on the sheets. A search of the hospital was immediately conducted, but the children were not found. The police launched a campaign to find them, but there were no pictures of them anywhere, which made the search difficult. They called Jake's brother in Harrisburg, who said he hadn't talked to his brother in over 15 years and had never met his nieces and nephew. There's no record of what happened to the house they fled from. For more scary horror stories, please like. Thank you for joining Dark Rot Legends. Subscribe for more tales of terror.